His name is Robert, and, at 78 years old, his daughter-in-law treats him like a nuisance. She speaks to him with contempt, throws his plate on the floor if he doesn't eat quickly enough, and orders him to clean the house as if he were a servant. No one should have to see a father be humiliated in his own home, much less by someone who joined the family through marriage. What would you have done if it were your father? Tell me where you're watching from, like if this story touched you, and subscribe. In a cramped kitchen in the Bridgeport neighborhood of Chicago, the refrigerator hummed a tired tune that seemed to match the rhythm of old Robert's breathing. The smell of bleach mingled with that of reheated coffee. The cold floor bit at his bare feet as he scrubbed a frying pan blackened by years of use. The fluorescent light flickered irregularly, as if it too were exhausted. Through the slightly ajar window came the sound of a neighbor's radio and the distant call of a tamale vendor. On the faded formica table, a chipped mug and a plate with cold leftovers from the previous night completed the scene of daily neglect. The wall clock read 11 in the morning when the firm click of Camilla's heels echoed down the hallway. His daughter-in-law entered in immaculate Italian designer shoes and a blouse that cost more than all the furniture in that kitchen combined. Her expensive perfume cut through the air like a knife, overpowering the domestic smells. "Eat up and stop complaining. You're not a child," she said, without looking at him directly, checking her latest generation smartphone. She tossed a crumpled napkin into Robert's chapped hands and slid her phone across the gleaming countertop he had cleaned 3 times that morning. The house, with its old walls and a fan that barely stirred the hot Chicago noon air, seemed to lean in favor of the one who wielded power. Robert chewed in silence, each bite feeling like a stone going down his throat. The clock ticked the slow rhythm of his wounded dignity. Camilla checked her reflection in the phone's screen, then turned to him with that air of superiority she had perfected since Ethan began traveling so much for work. "When you're done, sweep again and do it right this time. Get into the corners. Yesterday you left dust everywhere," she ordered while adjusting her gold bracelet. He picked up the plate without protest. The spoon hit the ceramic, and the sharp sound cut through the room like a whip. He thought of Mercedes, his late wife, and how she used to turn this very kitchen into a place of laughter and delicious smells. Now, only thick silences remained, the kind that make your chest ache, and an indignation that rose in his throat, though he never said a word. "Are you listening to me? It's like you get deafer every day." Camilla raised her voice as she opened the refrigerator. "And throw away those old photos from your nightstand. They collect dust, and this place is depressing enough as it is." Robert pressed his lips together. Those photographs were his treasure, Mercedes smiling in front of Old St. Mary's, Ethan with his college diploma, little Nicholas as a newborn. They were his history, the only thing he had left. He had tried to explain it once, but Camilla cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "They're just old papers. You live in the past, and that's why you're a burden." The word burden struck him like a dagger. Robert felt the air leave his lungs. He remembered when he was the one who provided for the house, when his carpentry shop produced the best doors in the neighborhood, when his son looked at him with admiration. Now, at 78, with his hands deformed by arthritis and his vision failing, he had become a nuisance, according to his daughter-in-law. Camilla left the kitchen, leaving a trail of disapproval behind her. Robert rose slowly, took the broom, and began to sweep as tears welled up in his eyes without falling. He wouldn't allow himself that luxury. Men don't cry, his father had taught him. But sometimes, when he swept the dark corners, when he washed other people's dishes, or when he ate cold leftovers alone, he felt something inside him break irrevocably. Through the window, he saw Mrs. Teresa, the woman who sold herbs from her stall on the corner. She greeted him with a nod and a compassionate smile. Teresa had noticed the change in Robert, from a respected man in the neighborhood to a silent shadow who barely left the house. Several times she had offered him chamomile tea for the nerves, and he accepted the small gesture of kindness with gratitude. The sound of the television came from the living room, where Camilla was watching her shows at full volume. Robert finished sweeping and sat on a small stool by the window. He took from his worn shirt pocket the rosary that had belonged to Mercedes. He held it in his fingers like an anchor in the middle of a storm. "God doesn't give you more than you can handle," he murmured to himself, the only comfort he had left as he counted the beads, one by one. On each bead, he placed a silent prayer, for his absent son, for his grandson, they barely let him see, for the memory of Mercedes that was beginning to fade in his tired mind. Outside, Chicago continued its frantic pace. Inside, in that cramped Bridgeport kitchen, time had become an unbearable weight on the stooped shoulders of Robert, a man who had built with his own hands everything that was now denied him: respect, dignity, and a place to call his own. Before that kitchen, there was a long road filled with effort. Robert was born in Maple Creek, Ohio, where the smell of freshly baked bread and the sound of the parish bells marked his childhood. He learned to work early with his father in the cornfields, feeling the damp earth between his fingers and the sun burning the back of his neck. His mother, a woman of unwavering faith, taught him to pray and to never stop being grateful, even in the hardest times. "Gratitude is the one treasure no one can steal from you," she would say, as she shucked corn in the dim light of a lantern. At 16, after his father's death, Robert traveled to the city with a tattered backpack and a simple dream beating in his chest: to give the family he would one day have what he had lacked. On his first day in Chicago, it was pouring rain, as if the sky itself wept for his displacement. For weeks he slept at the bus station, clutching the image of the Virgin Mary his mother had given him at their parting. He sold hot dogs on a corner of Michigan Avenue, enveloped in the hot steam that fogged his glasses. He carried heavy lumber in a workshop, where the owner, Mr. Gustavo, noticed his dedication and began to teach him the trade. Over time, amidst sawdust and varnish, his hands learned to transform wood into useful and beautiful objects. "You've got good hands, kid," Mr. Gustavo told him when Robert carved his first complete door. "Wood doesn't lie. It responds to the respect you treat it with." At 28, with savings hidden in a cookie tin, he set up his own shop in a small space in Bridgeport. Maple Creek Woodworking, the hand-painted sign read. His doors soon gained a reputation. They lasted for decades, withstood the city's volatile weather, and never, ever warped from the humidity. It was at the opening of his workshop that he met Mercedes. She had come in looking for a frame for a religious picture and left with a promise and a heart beating faster. Mercedes, with her soft voice and hands that were always clean despite her work as a nurse, became his serene accomplice, the woman who turned his silences into conversations and his fears into certainties. They married in a neighborhood parish on a Sunday in May. They had no honeymoon, but they shared an afternoon in Lincoln Park that was worth 1,000 trips. Together, they built a modest but dignified home in Bridgeport, where every object had a story, and every corner held a memory of their efforts. When Ethan was born, Robert carved a cedar crib that scented the room. As the boy grew up among books and wooden toys, the workshop prospered. Robert hired helpers, expanded the space, bought better tools. His hands, increasingly skilled, created pieces that began to adorn homes in the Gold Coast and offices in the Loop. "Study, son," he would tell Ethan, showing him his calloused hands. "Honest work is never a disgrace, but you can go further." And Ethan studied. With scholarships and his parents' constant support, he got into a university to study engineering. The day he received his diploma, Robert and Mercedes cried with pride. The photo from that moment, with the tall young man holding his diploma and his parents by his side like guardians, took center stage on the living room shelf. Ethan started working at a tech company, and soon his travels became frequent. He met Camilla at a conference in Miami. She, a marketing executive with clear ambitions, dazzled him with her presence. When Ethan introduced her in Bridgeport, Robert and Mercedes immediately noticed her appraising gaze sweeping over their modest home. But they remained silent for the love of their son. The wedding was held in an exclusive garden. Robert and Mercedes seemed out of place among executives and influential people, but they smiled with dignity. The following year, Nicholas was born, lighting up the house with his infectious laughter and insatiable curiosity. Robert carved him a wooden rocking horse that the boy adored. Then, like a storm no one saw coming, Mercedes fell ill. It started with pains that she, accustomed to caring for others, downplayed. When they finally saw a doctor, the cancer had already advanced too far. 3 months later, Mercedes passed away on an autumn afternoon, holding Robert's hand as the leaves fell in the hospital garden. The workshop closed its doors. Robert, shattered, put away his tools like someone burying their dreams. Ethan, worried about his father and increasingly busy with his work, suggested he move in with them. Camilla smiled tightly and nodded without enthusiasm. "It'll be temporary," Ethan said. just until you feel better. But time is relative when grief settles in. Days, weeks, months passed as Robert tried to find his place in a house that never felt like his own. Ethan traveled constantly. His company was growing, and his responsibilities kept him away for weeks at a time. Camilla, little by little, let her mask of cordiality drop. Mercedes's rosary and the framed photograph, with its scratched glass, became Robert's most precious possessions. That rosary, warmed by so many prayers, and that photo were his hope. Simple objects that held the memory of what once was and what, perhaps, could be rebuilt. In Bridgeport, the neighbors remembered him fondly. Mr. Robert, the one who gave sweet rolls to the children on Sundays, who fixed broken toys for free, who listened to others' problems with genuine attention. Mrs. Teresa, from the herb stall on the corner, would bring him chamomile tea when she saw he looked pale. And Nicholas, his grandson, when he could, would sneak away from Camilla to give him a quick hug because she didn't want him to be spoiled. Even submerged in pain and growing humiliation, Robert believed that life could turn around. He believed it every time he ran his finger over the worn beads of the rosary and murmured the prayer his mother had taught him. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. That quiet faith, mixed with memories of hard work and dignity, sustained him in the cramped kitchen where time had become an almost unbearable weight. At dusk, when everyone was asleep, Robert would take a small, crumpled photo from the back of his drawer, he and Mercedes, young, smiling in front of the newly opened workshop. He would look at it for a long time, as if searching for answers in the happy eyes of that couple who believed the hardest part was over. Then he would put it away carefully, knowing that Camilla constantly threatened to clean out his junk. The following days brought new humiliations, like incessant drops of water eroding the rock of his dignity. On a particularly hot afternoon, Camilla placed a plate of sour rice from the refrigerator in front of him. The rancid smell hit his nose as she smirked. "We don't waste anything in this house," she said in a monotone voice, though the very morning she had thrown away an almost untouched cake because she didn't feel like it anymore. Robert looked at the plate in silence. His stomach clenched, but he picked up the spoon and began to eat slowly, each bite an exercise in endurance. Camilla watched him from the corner of her eye while tapping on her phone, as if gauging how much he could take. At night, when Ethan called on video from Singapore, Camilla's face transformed into a mask of kindness as she held the phone. "Your father is resting, dear. You know how the elderly are. They need their sleep," she lied smoothly, while Robert, sitting in a corner of the kitchen, heard his son's distant voice. After hanging up, Camilla ordered him to scrub the floor, until it shines, even though he had cleaned it that morning. With aching knees and a bent back, Robert scrubbed the floor for hours, until the skin on his hands bled lightly, as if the effort were opening up the history of his fingers, those that had once created beauty from wood and now only served to clean what others dirtied. There, in that corner, "It's still dirty." She pointed with a finger whose nails were perfectly painted red. Robert noticed the changes in his body. His belt was loose, and his jacket hung on him like an apology. He barely slept, the metallic clatter of silverware still echoing in his ears and the constant fear of getting in the way again. He moved through the house like a shadow, trying to take up as little space as possible, to become invisible so as not to provoke Camilla's wrath. The house had become a labyrinth of chores and cold stares. Martina, the young woman who helped out a few hours 3 times a week, preferred to stay quiet, though she had caught glimpses of Camilla shoving Robert's shoulder. "So he understands." The young woman was afraid of losing her job if she said anything. Besides, Camilla always justified her actions. "Old people are like children. Sometimes you have to be firm with them," she would explain, with a professional smile, while serving coffee in fine porcelain cups to her friends. One afternoon, Robert found his bedroom door open and his drawers ransacked. The picture of Mercedes was no longer on the nightstand. "I threw it out," Camilla said when he, his voice trembling, dared to ask. "It was collecting dust, and this place is a breeding ground for mites. You should be thanking me for worrying about your health." That night, Robert rummaged through the trash until he found the broken frame and the crumpled photograph. He smoothed it out with infinite care and hid it inside his Bible, along with Mercedes' rosary. Nicholas, his 7-year-old grandson, hardly ever came to his room anymore. "He's grounded," Camilla would say when he asked about the boy. blocking the hallway with her imposing presence. But one morning, while Camilla was on the phone in the garden, the boy slipped into the kitchen where his grandfather was peeling potatoes. "Grandpa," Nicholas whispered, hugging him around the waist. "Mommy says you're sick in the head, and that's why you sometimes say things that aren't true." Robert felt something break inside his chest. He stroked the boy's hair and swallowed hard before answering. "Sometimes we old folks get a little confused," he said in a calm voice. "But I love you very much, Nicholas. Never forget that." "I love you too," the boy replied, before running off upon hearing his mother's footsteps in the hall. That brief conversation sustained him for days. When Camilla served him cold food or made him clean already spotless corners, the memory of Nicholas's arms around his waist gave him the strength to carry on. One dawn, while the neighborhood slept and only the distant rumble of the first buses could be heard, Robert woke with a start. Muffled voices were coming from the living room. He got up with difficulty and approached the ajar door silently. "Just get him to sign the power of attorney, and that's it. I'll take care of everything," Camilla's voice came through, a clear, urgent whisper on the phone. "The old man doesn't notice a thing. We can sell the house in Maple Creek before Ethan gets back from his trip." A chill ran down Robert's spine. The house in Maple Creek, the small property his parents had left him, which he kept for sentimental reasons, though he hadn't visited it in years. Camilla knew the property existed because he himself had told Ethan about it when they had discussed inheritance long ago. "Don't worry," Camilla continued on the phone. "My husband trusts me blindly, and his father is so deteriorated that he'll sign anything. Afterwards, we'll say it was his decision, that he wanted to help us with Nicholas's expenses." Robert clutched the rosary he always carried in his pocket and felt, like a soft but certain blow, that something hidden was about to come to light. Intuition, that wordless knowledge that comes with age, told him this was just the tip of the iceberg. With trembling hands, he returned to his room and took the photograph of Ethan from the Bible, placing it under his shirt as if it were a shield against what he had just discovered. He sat on the bed, his heart pounding. How many other things had Camilla done behind his back? Did Ethan know anything? The doubt was a poison spreading through his veins. The next morning at breakfast, Camilla entered the kitchen dressed with particular elegance. She carried a folder with documents and an expensive pen. "Mr. Robert," she said in a syrupy, extraordinarily kind voice, "I need you to sign some papers. They're for your health insurance to make sure you get better care when you need it." He stared at her, remembering the words he had heard in the dead of night. For the first time in months, he straightened to his full height. "I'll have to read them first," he replied with a firmness that surprised Camilla. "Don't be ridiculous," she retorted, the mask of kindness vanishing instantly. "They're complicated documents. You wouldn't understand them. Just sign here." Robert took the folder with hands that no longer trembled. His intuition was a thread he was beginning to pull, unraveling the truth. He would not sign anything without knowing exactly what it was, no matter how many more humiliations he had to endure. "I'll tell Ethan you've become paranoid," Camilla threatened, snatching the folder from his hands. "We all know your memory is failing. Who do you think is going to believe you?" The threat hung in the kitchen air like a foul odor. Robert lowered his head, but inside, something had shifted. The fear was still there, but now it was accompanied by a resolution he thought he had lost. To defend the little he had left, his dignity and the memory of what he had built with a lifetime of hard work. On Friday, without warning, and wearing a simple jacket that didn't betray his financial success, Ethan walked through the gate of the house in Bridgeport. He had parked his imported car 2 blocks away, preferring to walk the streets of his childhood. The smell of fresh bread from the corner market, the sound of radios tuned to different stations, the call of the broom salesman. It all transported him to a simpler time before international trips and executive meetings consumed his days. He had come from the Loop, the financial district where he ran a tech company that had made him a millionaire before he was 40. His Italian shoes echoed on the uneven pavement as he thought about the call he had received that morning from Mrs. Teresa. "Your father is not well," the woman had said bluntly. "You should come see him in person." At first he had dismissed her concern. His father had always been a strong man, and Camilla assured him in every call that he was being well cared for. But something in Teresa's voice, a note of genuine urgency, had made him cancel 3 meetings and get in his car. Now, as he opened the old carved wooden door, one of the last his father had made, He felt a strange tightness in his chest. The house smelled different. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee he remembered from childhood had been replaced by a pungent scent of industrial cleaning products. He walked silently down the hallway, adorned with family photographs where he and Camilla appeared smiling on trips and at events. But he noticed with a pang that the older photos, the ones of his parents, had disappeared. The television was on in the living room, but there was no sign of Nicholas or his father. He headed to the kitchen, gently pushing the ajar door. The scene made him freeze. On the floor, an overturned plate, a trickle of spilled soup running towards the drain. On the table, a half-full glass with a fly floating in the murky liquid. And in front of the stove, his father, hunched over, with his hands wrapped in strips of cloth that had once been white and now showed yellowish stains. Robert hadn't seen him yet. He was trying to pick up the scattered ceramic shards from the floor with trembling fingers. His face, thinner than Ethan remembered, showed a painful concentration, as if he feared the consequences of every piece he failed to retrieve. From the living room, Camilla's voice erupted. "I told you to sweep properly. Now I have to clean up your messes too? Useless." Ethan didn't see her. He heard her approaching down the hall. And he also heard the tremor in his father's breath, a small, frightened sound he had never before associated with the man who had taught him to be brave. The shock of reality was like waking from a comfortable dream to find himself in the middle of a nightmare. The excuses he had accepted for months. Your father is more forgetful. He drops things. Sometimes he gets upset for no reason. Crumbled before the evidence in front of him. Mrs. Teresa, who had followed him to the house, peered through the service door. Recognizing him, she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "Son, you had to come back. Your father is not even a shadow of who he was." At that moment, Robert looked up and saw his son. His face went through an instant transformation. Surprise, shame, relief, all mixed in a second. He tried to get up quickly, hiding his bandaged hands behind his back. "Son, we weren't expecting you," he said in an unsteady voice. "Sorry about the mess. I dropped the plate." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. This diminished man, apologizing for an accident, was not the father he remembered, the carpenter with steady hands who had taught him that mistakes are acknowledged without shame and corrected with determination. Before he could respond, Nicholas came running down the hall. Upon seeing his father, the boy stopped abruptly, looking nervously behind him, as if fearing a reprimand. But then he ran and clung to Ethan's leg. "Daddy, you came," he whispered urgently. "They throw Grandpa's food away. They throw it away when he doesn't eat fast." The sentence, spoken with the brutal honesty of a child, hit Ethan like a slap. He looked at his son, then at his father, searching for a sign that this was a misunderstanding. Robert's eyes, dropping to the floor in a gesture that confirmed everything, were answer enough. The click of Camilla's heels grew closer. Ethan reacted quickly. He took his phone from his pocket and, with a discreet movement, activated the recorder. He placed the device on the counter just as his wife entered the kitchen. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she asked, her surprise quickly turning into a tense smile. "You didn't tell me you were coming." She was wearing an elegant suit, as if she were about to leave, and her makeup was flawless. She looked out of place in that kitchen with its wet floor and the smell of spilled food. "I wanted to surprise you," he replied, watching every micro-expression on his wife's face. "How have things been around here?" "Excellent, taking care of everything as always," she replied, moving in to kiss his cheek. As she did, she shot a warning glance at Robert. "Your father is a bit clumsy today. You know how they get at this age." Ethan took a deep breath, containing the anger that was beginning to boil inside him. He hugged Nicholas tightly and then, in a controlled voice, said, "Son, why don't you go stay with Grandma Teresa for a minute? I want to talk to Mommy and Grandpa." The boy nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation in a way only children can intuit, and ran towards where Mrs. Teresa was waiting. Once they were alone, Ethan took another deep breath and picked up his phone. He dialed a number while Camilla and Robert watched him, one with growing confusion, the other with a glimmer of hope in his tired eyes. "Dr. Barreto, it's Ethan. I need your help urgently. It's about my father. I need to protect him. Today." The determination in his voice made Camilla turn pale. Robert, for his part, straightened up slightly, as if each of his son's words were a breath of life slowly reviving him. In minutes, Ethan and the lawyer on the other end of the line began to draw up a plan, review property deeds, block any power of attorney signed under duress, establish clear boundaries in the house. The revelation wasn't just the plate on the floor. It was the sum of voices. The son who now saw, the grandson who had spoken, the neighbor who dared to bear witness. In Robert's weary eyes, something slowly kindled. It was not anger or revenge, but the dignity returning to claim its rightful place. The scene took place that same afternoon, with the sunlight filtering obliquely through the worn curtains. In the living room, in front of the china cabinet and the portrait of Mercedes that someone had rescued from the back of a drawer, Ethan gathered everyone: Camilla, Mrs. Teresa, Martina, and even the building supervisor, Mr. Joachim, who had seen notaries coming and going when Ethan was traveling. The atmosphere was thick, charged with electricity. The floral-patterned sofas, silent witnesses to so many humiliations, now seemed to hold their breath as everyone sat down. Robert remained standing by the window, his figure silhouetted against the yellowing light, as if he didn't dare take up space in his own home. Nicholas was playing in the garden, shielded by Mrs. Teresa from the words to come. From there, however, his occasional laughter drifted in like reminders of what truly mattered. Ethan placed his phone in the center of the coffee table. He was dressed simply, having changed out of his executive suit into jeans and a blue shirt that made him look more like the boy who once ran through these same streets than the businessman he had become. "Let's be clear," he began without preamble. "This morning, I saw something I never imagined I would see in this house. My father being treated worse than a servant, with fear in his eyes and wounds on his hands. Camilla, sitting with her back straight in a dress that cost more than Martina's monthly salary, tried to interrupt, but Ethan raised a hand. "Let me finish." His voice didn't rise, but each word landed like a hammer blow. He described to Camilla exactly what he had seen: the plate on the floor, the bandaged hands, his father's diminished frame. "And that's just what I saw today. From what I'm told, it's been like this for months." "Please, Ethan." Camilla adjusted the gold watch on her wrist, a nervous gesture he had never noticed before. "Your father is old. His memory is failing. You know how the elderly are? They exaggerate. They confuse things. Does he exaggerate this too?" Ethan pressed a button on his phone. The recording began to play. Camilla's voice, sharp and clear, giving orders, calling Robert useless, threatening to leave him without food if he didn't clean properly. Then, even more damning, a phone conversation about getting him to sign the power of attorney and selling the house in Maple Creek before Ethan gets back. The silence that followed was thick, almost solid. Martina, the young maid, stared at her clasped hands. Mr. Joachim coughed uncomfortably. Robert closed his eyes, as if hearing his own humiliations on tape was more painful than having lived them. "That's taken out of context," Camilla tried to defend herself, though her voice had lost its firmness. "I was stressed that day. You know how I get when I have too many responsibilities." Ethan didn't respond directly. Instead, he took another folder, a blue one, from his briefcase and opened it on the table. "This is the report Dr. Barreto prepared in record time," he explained with professional calm. "There are several important things here. First, no power of attorney signed under duress will be valid. Second, the house remains in my father's name, and the apartment where we live is jointly owned, as it always has been. Third, a complaint for elder abuse is being prepared." He presented each document with precision, as if he were in a boardroom instead of the living room where he had learned to walk. The lawyer had worked against the clock, reviewing deeds, consulting experts on elder rights, preparing Robert's legal defense. Camilla tried to smile, though the gesture was halfway between a sneer and fear. She stood up, walked over to Ethan, and placed a hand on his shoulder, which he immediately shrugged off. "Darling, this is a misunderstanding," she said in a sweetened voice. "Your father is elderly. Old age makes him confuse things. I gave him the best care, but you know how they are at that age, so suggestible." Just then, the garden door opened and Nicholas ran in, having escaped Mrs. Teresa's watch. He stopped in the middle of the room, looking at the tense faces around him. "Are you fighting with Mommy because she's mean to Grandpa?" he asked with the simple truth of children. Camilla turned pale. "Nicholas, don't say silly things. Go to your room." But the boy, instead of obeying, walked over to Ethan and said in a clear voice, "I saw you kick Grandpa's plate because he was eating slowly, and you yelled that he was a nuisance. The living room, which had been a stage for contempt for months, seemed to throw open its windows to let in fresh air. The truth, spoken by innocent lips, had a liberating power. Robert, from his corner by the window, took a deep breath, like someone surfacing after a long time underwater. "I turned a blind eye for too long," murmured Mrs. Teresa from the doorway, crossing her arms over her chest. "I saw how Robert was losing weight, how his spirit was dimming, and I did nothing until today." "I saw things too," added Martina in a timid voice. "Ma'am, you would throw away his food if he dropped a utensil, make him clean the same spot over and over, hide his medicine to make him anxious." Mr. Joachim cleared his throat and added, "A notary came by 2 weeks ago. I let them in. Mrs. Camilla told me it was to sort out some papers for the boys' school, but I thought it was strange." Ethan took a step forward, placing himself between his wife and his father. There were no shoves or insults, just the firmness of someone setting a necessary boundary. "In this house, my father is respected," he said in a calm but unyielding voice. "You will leave this house today, Camilla. The complaint is ready, but whether we file it will be my father's decision." "You're kicking me out?" Camilla's face transformed, the mask of pleasantness falling away completely. "You can't do this to me. Everything I've built, my position, my image." "You built yourself on my father's crushed dignity," Ethan replied without raising his voice. "And that ends today." Camilla looked around, searching for an ally, a crack in the wall of truth that had risen before her. She found none. With stiff movements, she went up the stairs to the bedroom. The sounds of drawers opening and closet doors slamming were heard. Meanwhile, Ethan approached his father, and, for the first time in a long time, hugged him as he had when he was a child. Robert, his eyes moist, allowed himself to rest on his son's shoulder, feeling an invisible weight lift. Minutes later, Camilla came down with 2 designer suitcases. Nicholas watched from a corner, confused but calm, under his grandfather's protective hand. Before leaving, Camilla tried one last time. "Ethan, you're making a mistake. Everything I did was for our own good, for Nicholas's future." "Go, Camilla," he replied wearily. "We'll talk about the rest with lawyers present." The door closed behind her. The sound echoed through the house, as if the walls themselves were exhaling in relief. The house breathed, as if clean air were finally entering after a suffocating storm. Ethan turned to the others. "Thank you for your courage, for speaking up. Sometimes we look without seeing, and I have been blind for too long." Nicholas approached his grandfather and took his bandaged hand gently. "You won't be sad anymore, Grandpa." Robert, with tears in his eyes, sat down again at the dining room table, not to eat cold leftovers in solitude, but to have a hot coffee that Martina had carefully prepared, one that smelled like a reclaimed home. Dignity rises without making a sound, but everyone feels it when it returns to its rightful place. Justice continued in the following days, publicly and necessarily, like a wound that needs to be cleaned in the light. At the neighborhood civil courthouse, an old building with windows opaque from city dust, a formal hearing was held. The room was lit by fluorescent bulbs that hummed faintly, a counterpoint to the solemn silence among those present. Robert, wearing a navy blue suit they had bought for the occasion, sat upright next to Ethan. His hands, still marked but no longer bandaged, rested on his knees. He had regained some weight in the last few days, and his gaze was regaining the clarity that had characterized him his whole life. Across from them, at a long table, sat the judge, a prosecutor specializing in domestic violence, and a representative from the Council on Aging. On the other side was Camilla with her lawyer, a man in a gray suit and leather briefcase who seemed uncomfortable with the case. The proceedings were methodical and rigorous. The testimonies of Mrs. Teresa and Martina were read, detailing every incident they had witnessed. Food thrown on the floor, constant insults, hidden medications, daily humiliations. The supervisor, Mr. Joachim, testified about the notaries who had visited the house in Ethan's absence, and the various occasions he had heard shouting and falling objects. "She always said Mr. Robert had fallen on his own," he explained in a firm voice. "But then I'd see him with new bruises." When Ethan's audio recording was played, a heavy silence fell over the room. Camilla's voice, sharp and clear, calling Robert useless and a burden while discussing plans to take ownership of the house in Maple Creek, echoed off the institutional walls. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Even he seemed surprised by the rawness of the material. The family doctor presented his report. Significant weight loss, mild dehydration, bruises in different stages of healing, signs of chronic stress. The patient showed clear indications of continuous mistreatment, he concluded. Not just physical, but also the kind of psychological abuse that sometimes leaves deeper scars. Camilla tried to defend herself. She spoke of the confusion common in old age, the stress of caring for an elderly person, of misunderstandings amplified by others. But her voice lacked its usual confidence. Her arguments sounded hollow against the accumulated evidence. The judge's ruling was clear and firm. Camilla was issued a restraining order, prohibiting her from coming within 500 yards of Robert. She lost access to family accounts she had been managing and was sentenced to 200 hours of mandatory community service at a nursing home, under professional supervision. Additionally, she was required to pay a significant fine and enroll in a re-education course on violence against the elderly. This court considers that respect for our elders is the cornerstone of a civilized society, the judge declared in closing. What has occurred in this case is a particularly reprehensible form of violence, as it preys on the vulnerability of those who deserve our utmost care. As a final measure, Camilla was ordered to offer a public apology, notarized and on the record. She did so with clenched teeth and downcast eyes, each word extracted like a thorn from her skin. "It's not revenge," Ethan explained to his father later as they drove home. "It's a just consequence and protection, so it never happens again." Robert nodded slowly, looking out the window at the streets of his neighborhood. He felt no joy or triumph, but a quiet certainty that the world was righting itself. Life resumed its course with new care and considerations. Ethan hired a neighborhood caregiver, Mrs. Lupe, who came 3 times a week to check on Robert's health. Afternoons now included domino games with neighbors in the backyard and regular visits to the local parish, where Robert had rejoined the Sunday Mass choir. Ethan dedicated weeks to fixing up the Bridgeport house. He painted faded walls, repaired forgotten leaks, and installed handrails on the stairs and in the bathrooms. He had a modern but discreet security system installed and decided to stay in the neighborhood for a few months before carrying out his plan: to move his father to a bright, accessible apartment he had bought in Lincoln Park, not far away, but with better amenities. In the afternoons, father and son would sit in the small workshop that Ethan had restored in the backyard. There, Robert began to handle light tools again, teaching his son and Nicholas the secrets of the trade that had been the center of his life. "See how the grain of the wood moves," he would explain to his grandson, guiding his small hands over a piece of cedar. "The wood tells you how it wants to be treated. You just have to know how to listen." One evening, after putting Nicholas to bed, Ethan and Robert talked in the now clean, warm, and reorganized kitchen. The table had been replaced by a new one, made by Robert with the help of his son and grandson, a project that had marked the beginning of his emotional recovery. "You know, son," Robert said, holding Mercedes' rosary in his fingers, "the only thing I ever wanted was respect. Not luxuries, not big things. Just to feel that my life meant something, that what I built mattered." Ethan moved, took his father's hands in his. They were the hands that had lifted him up when he fell, that had worked until they bled to give him an education, hands that now showed his history in every wrinkle and callus. "Dad," he replied in a firm voice, "respect isn't asked for, it's protected. And I will always protect you, just like you protected me." Nicholas came in his pajamas, having sneaked out of bed one last time. He placed on the table a drawing made with bright crayons, 3 figures holding hands in front of an open door. "That's us," he explained simply. "You, Daddy, and me. We're happy." Robert hugged his grandson, breathing in the smell of children's shampoo and feeling an immense gratitude for this second chance. The scars were still there, but they no longer defined his existence. The following weeks brought more positive changes. Ethan initiated divorce proceedings with clear and fair terms. Nicholas would spend most of his time with his father and grandfather, with supervised visits with Camilla until she completed her re-education program. The house in Maple Creek was put in Nicholas's name in a trust fund managed by a bank, ensuring its preservation as family heritage. The news spread through the neighborhood like fresh water. The neighbors who had been silent witnesses to Robert's decline now greeted him with renewed warmth. The bakery saved his favorite bread for him. The lady at the flower shop gave him a daisy every Sunday. The children once again asked him to tell stories in the central square. One afternoon, while walking through the Bridgeport Farmers Market amidst colorful stalls and vendors' calls, a group of elderly men approached to greet Robert. One of them, Mr. Gustavo, his old carpentry master, now nearly 100 years old, shook his hand firmly. "Your case gave courage to others, Robert," he said, his voice raspy but steady. "2 families around here have already reported mistreatment. Your example lit a candle." Robert nodded, moved by the unexpected reach of his story. He hadn't sought to be an example to anyone, only to reclaim his lost dignity. But that was how true justice worked, like a ripple in water that expands far beyond its origin. The lesson remained clear and simple, like a saying learned forever and passed down through generations. Respect is an inheritance that cannot be sold. Dignity is a right that does not expire with age. And a true family is one that protects the light of each of its members, especially when their strength seems to fail.